So the presentation we'll do is provide a bit of a strategic and sort of wider market context to rural housing in Wales. That's my challenge here. There's three things I want to do really. One is to look at just the big picture scene about what's happened to house prices, has things got more affordable with the credit crunch, and what's the problem. I should have mentioned as chair about fire exits and phones and things, but apologies, I'll keep going. The second bit then is about the structure of supply. I think the Welsh housing market in general has got a certain nature of housing supply that does have an impact about the access to housing. The third bit of the presentation is about the new build market, what a private developer is going to be doing. One thing I'd love to get out of today is there a big supply problem? I've read all the documents about rural housing. You know, is there a really big land supply problem, and how can we try and get more land coming through the market? And the final bit's just about affordability. And as we move towards maybe looking at intermediate tenures rather than looking at, say, social rented property versus owner occupation, where does rented fit in? Where does low-cost home ownership fit in across rural areas of Wales? And then a summing up at the end.
Now, the weight of public objection in itself would not be a material consideration if that objection was not based on what we call valid planning grounds. If it is, then yes, it's a material consideration. But if we had 100 letters saying we don't want this because, and it was not a very good reason, then that has no weight in the planning process. As is the same for private covenants or private interests. Basically, the planning process is one approval amongst many that a developer might need when he or she wants to develop a site. And once planning permission is secured, you may need to seek building regulations approval from subsequent or other landowners, overcome a private covenant, and the granting of planning permission doesn't affect that in any way. So it doesn't become, therefore, a consideration during the planning process. Neither does loss of property value. That's been held in the courts over a great many years, and that is not something that we can take into account. Neither can we take into loss of a private view. If somebody has a view, the next day might change. That's the way the courts have interpreted that. Suspicion or conjecture about future intentions. Again, it's not something that we can legitimately take into account, or matters covered by other legislation. And sometimes this is a tricky one because there are crossovers. You know, we heard about nature conservation before. Well, there is separate legislation that covers nature conservation. There's separate legislation that covers other aspects like environmental health. And we've got to be careful that we don't always use the planning process, the planning system, to replicate matters that are rightfully covered by other legislation. Because if nothing else, it just confuses the picture. We need to know where to draw the lines. Social issues as well. It's you know, from my perspective, whether I'm right or wrong, but some of the sort of social stigma that used to be attached to the notion of affordable housing, it seems to be, whether it's Paris, whether it's because it's better understood, I don't know. But it seems to be less prevalent here or now than it used to be when I was involved with this in a number of years ago. I don't think it's totally gone, but I don't think it's as bad as it used to be as an issue. But again, that's not something we can take into account. We're there to look at the planning principles. Is something needed? Can we make a case? Yes, we can. And one of the things that could not conspire against any decision that we make is the view that people may hold around you know, the NIMBYs, I think, as the previous speaker mentioned.
There is a more fundamental issue that affects our communities in Wales. And that is the fact that 200,000 people, 2010, 200,000 people in this country, just in Wales, do not have access to a basic bank account. 150,000 people in Wales borrow from doorstep lenders at rates of at least 200%. 15,000 people in Wales borrow from loan sharks who will charge at least 2,000%, who tend to have marketing lines, disgusting marketing lines that include phrases such as "don't feed your kids, pay me," who threaten and intimidate tenants, not just in social housing, but in privately owned and privately rented as well, to the point that some of them have attempted suicide. If we're talking about sustainable communities, I think we have to make sure that we take out some of the cancer that can drain communities of their confidence, that can lead to bigger problems, and that can also take fundamentally the spending power out of many of those communities as well.
This vision, as I said, and I'm trying to sort of an analogy between my work and general life, and this vision, the best I could think of is like a marriage really, is that you know, there's lots of ups and downs and that, but if you work in partnership and you work together and you really work hard at something, you will get there eventually. And the vision I see, you know, is I've lived in the national park in Brecon Beacons National Park since 1969. And I talked to Richard on the way up this morning, and I look back to who lives there now when I grew up, and I could only think of 2 youngsters that grew up with me in school that are actually left in the area. My parents and all their parents still live there, but that's why Give Island School is just threatened with closure. The post office is closed. People have just migrated away. So the vision I see, you know, I harbour back to the days that the local post office was there, the local school was open, the bus service was much more regular. And without providing some development, we're never going to get there. And you have to have this passion, enthusiasm and belief of what you're trying to achieve. I think Rydian Jones, that some of you might know as the first RHE in Wales, Rydian is here today, and I think he'll readily agree that when you become an RHE, you sort of keep that close to your heart throughout the rest of your life, really, because it's something you become passionate about. I see, you know, providing affordable housing in rural areas very much like walking along a long corridor in a hospital, and you can see the door at the end, and you know when you're walking along and you've got somebody sort of just walking about the same pace that you're just behind, and you don't know whether to speed up or slow down, and that's very often the opposition, the NIMBYs, and sometimes they're in front of you, and sometimes you're in front of them, and you speed up, and as long as you're at the door first, you've got your goal. If they get there before you, they can put the barrier in the way, they can close the door. So it's important we work fast and we keep the NIMBYs or the opposition behind us at all times. We have to be one step ahead.
The future, well, I'm not sure, and we've heard a lot this morning about where we're at and what the problems are and what we could do, but we do need to speed this process up. We do need to look at a much more streamlined planning position of how we actually get affordable housing and how we get land. We've got to keep it local, we've got to have local solutions. We have to highlight the role of the rural housing enabler because actually they are independent in a lot of ways, and that is very helpful when you're trying to negotiate. We have to make money available not just to registered social landlords, but also to people who want to have mortgages, and we have to force that through as well. We have to suspend the right to buy in certain areas, unless we are allowed to build the properties in its place. And finally, just to say, the future prosperity of Wales, and particularly rural Wales, is having a vibrant community, and it is through affordable housing, which is a key factor. It's a major key factor. We need to get it sorted. We need to get building, not talking about it. And we need to do what is right and not what is easy. Thank you very much.
What's your view on, are there any particular issues that differ, say, in an urban area to a rural area? And what any particular planning issues that we should be aware of? I mean, there's 1 or 2 issues that really make a big difference.
Well, I think it's fundamentally, from my perspective, the difference between an urban area and a rural area comes down to the other elements that we're charged with delivering or protecting in this case. You know, we do have the planning system is there to protect rural areas or the countryside for its own sake, and we have to find a way to balance that with the need for the right forms and the right scales of development. Whereas in urban areas, you're not really, fundamentally from that very first hurdle, that very first starting point, do you have that same context? And that's one of the biggest issues. Yeah. Plus the fact that in an urban area, there is a greater, generally, a greater availability, services, goods, employment opportunities that don't happen in a rural area. So it's important that we have complementary ways of means of delivering sustainable communities in the wider setting, in the wider sense, rather than just purely concentrate on housing, that we do have the employment and the services to support that. Where again, that probably isn't quite the same dimension to the same extent in an urban area.
Okay.